First question. Is breathing voluntary or involuntary?
Like everything else, it's unless it's both, you have a problem. Voluntary breathing is voluntary, involuntary breathing is involuntary. The breathing that keeps you alive all day, and especially during the night, is called involuntary because it doesn't require a conscious attention.
I have to think about breathing. How do I let body do the breathing naturally?
Do you really have that problem, or do some people really have that?
Some people have that.
Oh, okay. Well, I, for example, had that on when Barbara's aeroplane went up to above 15,000 feet, like above. Once it went up to 4,000 meters without an oxygen tank, I had to actually think to breathe. But there's something misprogrammed if you have to actually think to breathe in a normal atmosphere. So if someone had that problem, I would need to ask them how they make that problem, and I know how to ask people how they have that problem if they do. You're probably referring to like sleep apnea, for example, where the person suddenly forgets to breathe even while asleep, and they suddenly wake themselves up with a start and take a breath, like the involuntary function wasn't going. And I would personally ask the person or teach them how to speak with their body so that it's allowed to do those functions on its own without conscious attention, because that's what the body is meant to do.
What's the correct way of breathing?
Well, there's no the correct way, because it depends on the function you're doing. If you're breathing in order to make an energetic, emotional or spiritual change, then there would be a method specific to that, and I'll outline the ones I use specifically for some courses during the process of this recording. However, the main error that most people make in breathing is breathing shallowly, like they're not breathing enough with the diaphragm, not filling the full amount of the lungs, which of course would be a reflection they're not fully participating in life and learning to breathe. So they are participating in life coming into the body. They are likely to learn by extension to participate more into life. So any correct breathing for normal day-to-day application, there will be the diaphragm dropping first so that the air is brought into the lungs, and then fill the middle of the lungs, and then the top of the lungs, which is using the intercostal muscles third. People who are very nervous, frightened, not well participating in life, suffering from the effects of drugs, depressed, will be breathing more with the top of the lungs and not letting air come in deep. Conditions like asthma, where the person is struggling to breathe air in, they're panicking to breathe in, but that's because they didn't actually breathe out. Asthma is much more of a spasm where they didn't manage to breathe out, so they can't get enough air in. And then the one exercise for asthma would be to use a towel to help squeeze the ribs to get more air out, and then take a breath in and learn to breathe out enough to breathe in. There will be changes in breathing if you're going to be running that will use additional muscles which are not part of normal day-to-day breathing use. Not that someone running usually needs to think about that, but the habit that most people have is shallow breathing, not moving the diaphragm much first, and they can never fill their lungs up enough and fully participate in life.
Is abdominal breathing the correct way of breathing?
Well, of course, that's just been covered. Abdominal, I presume you mean diaphragmic. The main amount of air that will enter the lungs is by the movement of the diaphragm. And if the person is mostly breathing by the intercostal muscles, that's costa means ribs and inter in between, so the muscles between the ribs are mostly filling the top part of the lungs, and so a person in a depressed posture like this is actually collapsing the ability of the diaphragm to move. So they will mostly be breathing with the intercostal muscles, with the ribs moving, and they'll be breathing shallow, and that will be reducing drastically their energy, and that will feed back into the depression. Then they'll think of more reasons why life is difficult, because their breathing is not letting them participate in life, and that will worsen the condition. So sit up straight with your shoulders back, as Jordan Peterson says, or as an elderly friend of mine in Copenhagen was told by his mother 75 years ago, if you slouch like the working class, you'll be paid like the working class. Take a posture, and part of that posture includes the possibility of the diaphragm moving and letting the air in.
Does my thoughts affect my breathing?
Yes, because everything affects everything. And while the people would like a linear answer, like that, the most popular self-help theory of the moment, where thoughts is central. I think of something, therefore I will attract it. People want their thinking to be so important. Well, no, thinking is just simply one aspect. However, if your thinking was negative or reversing time, then your breathing would actually match that pattern, your muscles would go into that pattern, your tone of voice would go into that pattern. Or if you used a negative tone of voice, that would affect your muscle posture, which would affect your breathing, which would affect could your spirit interact with your body. So actually the right place to enter is the place that you can enter. And there's not actually separate breathing, separate to your muscle posture, separate to your spiritual posture, separate to your thoughts, separate to the images you are making. You can choose to change any one of those, and it will change all of them. You can ask that as to more questions. If any of these lead to more questions, just ask them. Because maybe there's more information on any of them.
Does releasing one of the negative body postures with the deep breathing technique gets you more energy?
Well, it does, although that is the deep breathing technique, so that hasn't specified which one. So I could, if you wish, at this moment outline some of the essential breathing patterns as they exist in the purposes of the workshop trainings I have, because there's a few different approaches to breathing, not so many, but then haven't yet been described clearly anywhere. So one I've described hundreds of times, but may not be written clearly, is the ego hit breath that's used in the mirroring. So that is a sudden inspiration, like a short, sharp breath that hits the throat. So maybe that's step 2, because you can't suddenly have an inspiration without an expiration, or an inhalation without an exhalation. Just because inspiration can mean 2 things. So you would need to breathe out to suddenly breathe in. But then, so in the process of mirroring, you're reaching up to another dimension, another conceptual level in your mind. And once the air has gone out deeply, you will breathe in with a very sudden breath that hits the throat, and the throat being the center of communication. The fixed way of your ego and will suddenly be displaced, because the ego is your sense of who you are to sell and how you're going to sell yourself. Now, at the moment of mirroring, you're not selling yourself. You are totally honoring the other person who is right there in front of you. So you will that mirroring will only occur with no fixed ego of your own, so that you can participate in or appreciate the ego of or the presence of the other person. So that's a short, sharp breath that hits the throat, and at that moment you are full of air with a sudden hit, with the ego displaced, and then of course you would either suffocate or breathe out. So of course, if you're breathing out, in this case, from the top of the lungs first, then the center, and then from the bottom first, with no ego, then you'll have prepared yourself to receive what is there in front of you and see what is there. So that is the ego displacement breath. Now, in the case of the breath used to release problems in the Barkley barrier breaker, the person has a petrified posture. They have a character armoring. They have an electrical field stuck in the muscles, so the muscles are not flexible and moving. So actually every petrified posture is interfering with their breathing patterns, with their circulatory patterns. It affects their heart. It affects their emotions, it affects the energy, and it affects their breathing. For thousands of years it was believed that the center of emotions is the heart. And then some, in discovering, well, the heart pumps blood, how could it be the seat of emotions? Well, it feels like the seat of emotions is at the level of the heart. The function of the heart would be to bring energy to every part of the body without judgment, which is a very heartful idea. And even though it was for a time thought unscientific to think such ideas as like someone died of a broken heart, when there was an extreme emotional problem. The fact is that it has now recently been discovered as physically it really does happen. In rare cases, even from suddenly having to do public speaking, but more commonly because a loved one died or some sudden huge emotional loss, there's a condition where the heart physically changes shape to the shape like a Japanese vase that holds flowers. It physically becomes twice as big, alters its shape, and people have actually died of it. The heart does physically change its rhythm and its shape based on emotions. So it wasn't just fantasy that the emotional mind is centered around the heart. And conditions like anxiety, shock, or like a near traffic accident instantly changes your breathing, instantly changes your heart rate. There will be visualizations with it. Oh, how great I'm alive, like I didn't go over that cliff because I narrowly escaped the car on the wrong lane, and here I am, how great I'm alive. So there'll be a variety of emotions, there'll be many changes of breathing, and many changes of the action of the heart, but it can be physically, measurably vast, the difference of the size, shape and rhythm of the heart depending upon the emotional state. So where the person is in a petrified posture, which is really there with almost everything that comes out of their mouth, because almost everything that comes out of their mouth is a limitation. Almost everything that comes out of almost everybody's mouth is something that they can't do. It's a limitation, saying what's hard to believe. What will happen if something tomorrow? It was so sad something happened yesterday. This other person has a problem. Every one of those is a petrified posture which is interfering with your blood circulation, your nervous energy and your breathing. So in the technique, the person is exaggerating the energy of the petrified posture, which of course means they are finally conscious how they are petrifying their own self. Petrify is turn to rock. They're turning their own, like petrified wood used to be a tree and now it's a rock. And they're petrifying their own self from some old idea, and the petrified posture holds the idea and it's holding back their breathing. So you're not just changing it by breathing, you're changing it by making it worse, which means consciously doing it. Consciously doing what was automatic. Now that you're consciously doing what was automatic, the easiest access to change it is your breathing. Maybe you could dance, maybe you could sing, but you cannot sing without breathing, you cannot dance without breathing, and everyone is welcome to dance and sing while they breathe in releasing a petrified posture. Or whatever movement the body uses is there. But the one that's specified is breathing. Why? Because if you want to release a petrified posture and you go, like you just, like you make the same breath as you're desperate because the world has no meaning, which is a breath only at the top of the lungs. You're not filling with energy right down to the diaphragm. Well, you won't release anything unless you do breathe down deep. Now, if you actually decided to release, that decision would have you breathe deep. But to help you make the decision, the instruction in the exercise is a 3-stage breath, which is like basically the 3-stage ideas from pranayama, to fill yourself up with the energy of the universe, which is the diaphragm being dome-shaped becomes straight, so that pulls itself down by straightening, which brings in a huge amount of air into the bottom of the lungs and the middle, and then the ribs will move and you'll fill up to the top, and often also the other muscles like the scalene muscles, connecting the neck to the back, will often move as well. More typically, those upper muscles are not part of normal breathing, but when you're running or exercising, like when you need more air, then some extra muscles come into play. So by having the exercise of making it worse, exciting, let's really release it, you're getting the same amount of activation as if you're running and doing a really strong exercise. So without thinking, you will be using the extra muscles of breathing, which normally only take part when you're doing heavy exercise. But if I told you, like the instruction were to use your scalene muscles, where are they? How do I use them? Well, the fact is they come into play when it's big and it's exciting. So we don't have to specify those muscles, but we do have to specify the diaphragm, because if you say take a deep breath and the person goes, just my shoulders moved up and my ribs contracted and I took in air from the top of my lungs. So if people understand by take a deep breath, first the diaphragm and then here, you suddenly feel full of the universe, and things you're able to believe in change. So even if in the process to release a particular posture you have to do some antics and whatever breathing also happens, you're never going to release it unless you really fill the lungs up from really deep and up. And every petrified posture is stopping you from breathing so deep. Every petrified posture is interfering with your breathing. So by consciously using the full classic pranayama 3-stage, diaphragm, center, top of the lungs, and now you're going to release it fully. Then the variations necessary for that particular posture don't need to be taught. Feel free to dance and sing. In Brazil they will dance on tables. Don't have plastic tables in a workshop room in case they dance on them, releasing things. So it's a breath in which you're now participating in your presence as a flowing part of the universe, instead of an isolated part, because in all cases, depression, even though there's many ways of describing what depression is, and people use the word in whatever way they do, still, in all definitions, the person is feeling isolated. And a full breath here, the person will not be feeling so isolated. Isolated from life now, isolated from life in the past, isolated from all the things I was told that cannot happen. So that's the basic brain trainer 3-stage breath with its intuitive counterparts at the end. Now, in the case of the doing something different exercise, liberating difficult people, well, typically there will be some breathing which is similar to the problem that you think the other person has, and then you're shifting that to something else, and then that will shift the situation in both people. So the main thing in that will be allowing a different breath than normal. And that might be any change. But the basic concept is noticing how you are breathing, thinking, visualizing, and change it. So if the image is that person with a aggressive face, your thought is he's an idiot, and your breathing is shallow. Well, you will see some genius in him, because that's different than he's an idiot. You will see his aggressive face as he's an actor, because that's different than his face is aggressive, he's a good actor, is a different thought. And let your breathing be different, and your breathing might be ready for action, like to hit him back, but he is not even hitting you anyway, it's only a look. But people have this look and they're ready to hit back because we're so used to for like a few million years reacting to the other animals, and reacting in these ways that no longer have any meaning. So we need to update our reactions to the moment. So the person changes from idiot to genius, they change from aggressive to actor, and you change from victim who's justified at hitting back to dancer, for example. So then you'll be allowing multiple breathing shifts. You'll be more aware of your breathing and noticing how it's changing. You won't be trying to change in one particular way with the difficult people exercise, but you'll be celebrating in the difference of your breathing, whatever that might be. Now, in the case of trances, when a client is in a deep trance, almost always the therapist is breathing the 3-stage breath in line with the patient, in sympathy with the patient. That is not usually necessary to decide to do, although it's done with NLP tricks for empathy exercises. To practice, one breathes in tune with the other person. But when you're actually good at it, you just are breathing in tune with the other person without actually thinking about it. And that just is natural. And your client will be breathing even deeper in tune with your breathing because you are in tune with their breathing, and both will go deeper. So in that case it will be without rehearsing, but a 3-stage breath from the diaphragm, and very full breaths because you're filling the entire body, and then they will change at various stages. Because if the client is releasing a terror from the past, well then with terror, desolation, normally the person breathes in and then out, like they're short breaths trying to push something out, and if you actually copy that breath for as long as 1 minute, you'll really feel like the world is coming to an end, even if you're happy before, if you just change to the breathing of a desperate person. So of course in a trance helping someone, you might shift from this deep breathing to yeah, so you might shift into a desperate breath, and it smoothly changes to the deep yoga breath. You would never use the negative emotion breath for more than a short number of sessions in a deep trance. But for the client to feel understood, it very often will be necessary that you have moved into their breath. However, if you're using such breaths for therapeutic purposes, you will need to set the visualization that you're doing this change to free somebody, not to be clever and feel how bad they are. While that's very normal in therapy, it's destructive. To start to mirror the negative just because you're smart and you can see the negative. Well, you don't have to be smart to see the negative. Every insane person is great at seeing the negative. There's nothing clever about, I'm so intuitive, I know he has a problem with his father. Like any idiot can do that. That's nothing. What you need is to start from a place of liberation and choose to suffer for the purpose of the person letting go. And that way you will be starting with a very full, expansive breath with the universe, which will shift to something desperate for a few seconds and smoothly changes out again. So that's a very powerful technique of changing a life via changes in the breath. One other type of breath I've often mentioned in workshops, which is not usually a part of a workshop, but just how it's recorded. We could call it the choir breath. The story where Milton Erickson. Everything about Milton Erickson is paradoxical. No one really knows was the mythology real or not, because he's one of our great mythological psychologists. And however, Milton Erickson, as the story goes, was tone deaf. It's a little hard to find out exactly what tone deaf means scientifically. The closest word I know is vocal motor amusia. Vocal, of the voice, motor of the nerves, the control muscles, amusia, not musical. Like that's someone that can't control the pitch of the voice and sing easily. I can't yet find what the term is for what that people usually mean when they say tone deaf, which is they sing out of tune happily and they don't even know they're singing the notes so wrong that they're torturing other people. I have no idea why, but it's more common in Spiritist churches than any other place I've been. I don't yet find the connection, but they often sing hymns quite out of tune and look happy. Yeah, so that was Milton Erickson's impression of the church choir. And how do they look happy when they sound so awful? So the story is he was tone deaf and it wasn't the choir, it was him. So he came to the conclusion they were breathing together. So what is the breath together in a church choir? Well, typically there are 4 bars of music in a line with 4 beats each. Occasionally there's 3, but usually churches are not singing waltzes as in 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Typically there's 4 beats to a bar, 16, 4 bars, and then there's the next line. So the choir, in order to sing, has to breathe in quickly, so they can breathe out for 16 beats. So if a group of people were to breathe the same as a breath as the church choir, so they breathe in half a beat, because you can't breathe in slowly and relax, because you'd miss the word, right? So the church choir has to use the breath that shocks out the ego, because it's physically the only thing they can do to be able to breathe in time, and then they'll breathe out for 16. So if you breathe in for 1 and breathe out for 16, and breathe in for 1 and breathe out for 16, that pattern of breathing together, you will enter a transcendental state of consciousness. So it actually is not, whether you were a Christian choir, a Buddhist choir, or folk singing, Danish songs like you see these, people in Denmark singing the songs of 200 years ago, looking so happy. They're breathing together in a rhythm of a sharp in-breath and a slow out-breath. And that does produce a very deep sense of community feeling. Now, in the case of the liberation exercise, we have that we take a deep breath in and out. So the purpose in this case is to reformat how your mind is in relation to an idea. Therefore, you are not don't have a preference for breathing in or preference for breathing out. Like if you wanted to remove something, you might force the breath out. And if you want to emphasize I'm taking in energy, you then might emphasize the breath in. But in the case of the liberation exercise, you are simply being present. The idea is to not judge an idea. So if the idea was I can't remember the song to sing. And if the other idea was the song can remember me, the idea is you don't judge one as wrong and one as right. They are ideas. And you're allowing your system to reset itself in relation to those ideas without judgment. Therefore, the breath will be non-judgmental. So, and it needs to fill the entire body. So it will be the 3-stage breath, letting air in at the diaphragm, and filling right up high, and then releasing right down. And fully that way, and that might be 3 or 4 times. Now, the instructions of that exercise is that you do each stage till there is a sudden change. It might be that you suddenly know something new. It might be you've suddenly lost an old habit. Or it might be that you've suddenly realized what the complementary item is. Or just your body posture suddenly changes. So the end of each part of each section, where you've worked with the how you see the idea, how you see its complement, the forgiveness level, and so on. At each level, there may be a sudden change, which may be some sudden exhalation or sudden inspiration, or the person might jump. Like there may be a sudden breath. However, that is not dictated by the exercise. That's by your body in peace may reset itself in accordance with this idea. So if the idea was sex is sacred, right, and some priest told you that sex is unholy, well, you would be breathing sex is sacred. Sex is sacred but suddenly it's unholy might explode itself, and you might suddenly exhale, but that would just be that what didn't match left, and that would not be a breath to rehearse. So the breath to learn is no judgment, and a no judgment breath is it fills all of the lungs from the bottom up. And then lets it all out from the top down. There is a variety where you can let out from the top down or let out from the diaphragm up. But this one you'll fill in for the diaphragm up and then from the top down. And it's that's a movement of no judgment where there's very little thinking. There's very little words with that breath. There's no need for words, because words imprison ideas, and that this is an exercise to de-imprison ideas. So it's a breath where the words are no longer where perceptions are no longer in coffins called words, and you'll know you'll have that breath right when there's no compulsion for thinking. You have the idea that's being reformatted, but you're not thinking about it. That will be released with that breath. There are some other breaths which are not in some workshops, but are in others that not everybody has been to. There's one that Chief Yuyur suggests for Eshu called fire breathing, and you'll find people have two opposite beliefs how to do fire breathing, which is the fire breathing tends to be fairly rapid, but some use fire breathing where it is equal in and out, and some use fire breathing where it's the exhaling is emphasized. So it's in, light, out, heavy, in, light, out, heavy. That would be if you're using it to expel emotions. And people still call that fire breathing, but to build up the energy in the body, like Eshu would be equal. That's also used in rebirthing. Rebirthing, there's a slow breath in, slow breath out, very long, very deep, and don't stop till the person is hyper-oxygenated. And and then panting, like shallow and very fast. And that's to kind of age regress them to when they were a scared little baby or some other interpretation, and then they're seen as releasing and reliving coming into the world. That's the two basic breaths of rebirthing, which I'm not normally using, but in workshops, although for hypnotic massage they are two useful breaths. For example, if the person is feeling some pain with massage on a particular place, then in hypnotic massage, the massage therapist says, instead of saying, "Oh, it hurts, am I pushing too hard?" says, "That's right," and starts breathe. The massage therapist will breathe deeper, so that the client breathes deeper and brings energy through the petrified muscle posture, or the cramp, if you call it that, and the person's energy will move through that instead of, because pain is resisting the energy moving. The same energy, the same sensation, and breathing through it, the person will see visions. They might see pictures. Like I worked out when I was having some zone therapy in Copenhagen with these really good zone therapists, that they can just tell which part of the little point on your foot to push that will cause agony. They're very easy to see. Across the room, you see a foot, you can tell, if I touch there, the person will scream, right? Yeah, they'll light up like they're red. So I found that if I do not have the idea that pain exists, but sensation, I started to see spotted jaguars walking through the walls, things like this, instead of pain. And that really helps to release the tension, the petrified posture, with hypnotic massage. So once you start to breathe deeper with the client, they start to breathe deeper with you. And instead of it hurts, because by it hurts they mightn't mean stop. But if the massage says, "Oh, I'm a bad person, I'm hurting them," then it makes pain. So the therapist moves in and breathes through. The client breathes through. And in some cases, the panting breath would be good to release, like if there's some anguish, like the person dog died and their muscles are tight. And so if you were going to release that with hypnotic massage, you might use the version of fire breath where the exhalation is stronger than the inhalation. That's the main therapeutic breaths which I would use. I'll just say a little on some observations on breaths in life, because they are breaths to change. People who are professional at depression, they know the earth is such a shitty place that you should feel it too. Most people have at least had the opportunity of a relationship with a professional depressive that wants you to share in their depression so they feel understood. Right? So such a professional depressive can seem so innocent, but they walk into the room and just sigh, but they do it all over you, and people feel this sticky stuff all over them. Yeah, so that's the aggressive, depressive breath. The sharing depression breath. And if you resist it, it sticks on you. If you just become transparent, it goes straight through you. Or if you see it in time, or if your hand sees it in time and rises up and becomes a... Okay.
you were talking about how some people are having this habit of of breath that is affecting other people.
Yeah, so, well, the main subject was that your breathing is part of a system and does affect other people. So in the case of a professional depressive, if they want to say, like, the world's such a terrible place, even if they just visualize it just before they say it, they can give a breath where everybody in the room feels like they're covered in garbage. And just one sigh and people feel hopeless. Any expert depressive can do this easily. So if you resist this, you'll get covered in garbage. So if you just become transparent and you're just not a terminal, you're not involved, it just goes through, that's one good protection. Another good protection, your hand just raises itself just before they do it and beams it away, for example, to the roots of a tree. And breaths, positive and negative, can affect other people. And you could, of course, wonder, is it just the breathing or is it the visualization that goes with the breathing? Did the visualization make the breathing? And so that brings us to a very ancient subject, which is subject to a lot of opinion because it works, but like the broken heart theory that could actually break the heart, the exact mechanism of how this happens is not so linear. So people can argue whether it's real or not. So if we take the subject of meridians, like in Chinese medicine where there's certain lines of energy in the body. Well, in fact, when you're breathing, when you are imagining just happiness or composing music, or you imagine that you're going to go on holiday, your imagination actually feels a lot bigger than your body. And it feels like there's a large field of energy all around you, probably because there's a large field of energy all around you. And these things do interact with other people. And the access could be to change the field of energy, to change the breathing, to change how you visualize the universe. So if you were to visualize, for example, your friend in hospital that needs more energy to decide to recover quickly, and you have this visualization, with this you are going to breathe deeper. And you will imagine him breathing deeper even though he's in another city. And he probably actually will breathe deeper even though he's in another city, because you are not imagining that he is distant. So breathing is one way of knowing you are part of the system, in not only sharing depression, but sharing healing. And the way you imagine you're part of the system actually does help. Now, you could think of the same thing with food. You could eat a plate of food because you're hungry, you just want to fill your stomach, it's just mechanical, it's just a thing. And you'll give yourself a certain level of nutrition, but actually you might not use the food properly. If you actually experience the food, if you understand the food, that the smell is something that is nutrition for your higher bodies, for your emotional self to also be filled. After all, it's very popular to eat in a context where people celebrate together eating or sharing of food. there's a certain emotional component to eating together. There's a physical component maybe to the physical nutrition, but if there's completely no flavor to the food, and much of your sensation of flavor comes from the smell of the food, by consciously appreciating the smell of the food as nutrition to more subtle bodies, to the energy fields around you, you start to fill up the whole system where your energy is flowing in a context. So eating, breathing, singing, everything, if you are feeling part of a greater context, then you are, and then the whole world can start to change around you. And I discovered this, for example, while tuning pianos. I can think I'm just tuning the piano. Yes, and that's really nice for the piano, and you get paid some money. But if you feel you're tuning the house, that the whole house is coming alive, it takes no more time. And really, isn't that the best way, one of the best tips on running business? I knew this person, actually it was Robert Took, who remembers going to the dentist with a smile. How can you remember going to the dentist with a smile? Well, they were so smiling, they were so honouring him present being there. And instead of remembering that, well, is it nice to sit in a chair for an hour like this with your mouth open? He didn't appear to have that memory. He appeared to have a memory of how well he was treated. So if you're breathing, you're feeling in harmony with the house, if you're tuning the piano, you're reading a book, you're cooking the dinner, whatever you're doing, like my friends in Melbourne, they cook Buddhist, vegetarian recipes from Buddhist monasteries in Thailand and in Malaysia. And they don't say anything about Buddha. They're just one tiny little statue up high, but they serve the food with reverence, they cook it with reverence, and they notice how people's lives change. Now, of course, because they were meditating as they cook, their breathing is deeper, but they're not thinking of it as a breathing exercise, they think of it as a cooking exercise. But the cooking in that way makes people just see the look on the cook's face, and you take a breath in to imagine how great that food will be. Like just remembering their food, I involuntarily just now took in a deep breath, because their food was so beautiful looking. It was a work of art. And I take in this deep breath, the emotion of that breath, in English is called awe, A-W-E. It's something so great that your mind stops and you just appreciate. You can't think a word. So their food inspired this emotion, and just to remember it, I took in that's the emotion of awe. You take in this very high in-breath and you hold it feeling huge. And food can accompany this. And when you're helping people as a therapist, how you breathe will make a change on the client, but mostly you're not thinking about that. But you will have feedback that, so happened that you took a deep breath when the client did. Good, it's flowing. So these breaths in life, people can pass on. Maybe the breath isn't the only way they pass it on, but it is a strong component of it, because it will always reflect in the breathing pattern. It also, of course, would reflect in the heartbeat, in the blood pressure, and it actually reflects in the galvanic skin response. Now, your skin physically changes by a vast degree. Its conductivity depending on which emotion. But of course, that's not something you are interested in measuring while you're having dinner. So, but certainly that's something you can be conscious of in life, honouring your breathing more, the subtle parts of the food. So the idea of meridians, has certain lines of energy, and acupuncturists use these lines, massage therapists use these lines. Now, some of those lines appear to represent the way ancient medicine saw the organs as being connected in function, which actually appears to be very wise to this very day. So in some cases the lines don't match exactly where nerves go. Of course, we're thinking in linear terms, like how the nerve goes from one organ to another. But to any endocrinologist, the connection between the glands is that of very complex chemical interactions, not just a direct linear response. Your DNA has the information to generate your whole body, but has no picture of a little person inside it. So, irrespective of whether the meridians follow or not, in some cases follow, in some cases not follow, what would people call lines of energy as in the nervous system, they do follow how functions are seen to connect. Now, because they've been used that way for thousands of years, even if they are or are not the only way to think of something, the fact is they are a map, and you can use almost any map, especially one that's been used before. We take the example of fire walking. You walk on something that's burning red hot, your feet burn, except when you're fire walking. So when you're fire walking, for many thousands of years, you walk on this official place where feet don't burn and feet don't burn. Now, if a little hot coal is outside of the official area, one hot coal is separate, that will burn your foot, because it's outside of the area where feet don't burn when you're walking on 1,000 coals. So there are many supposed explanations, like think positive and whatever. However, every explanation for fire walking is different than every other explanation. And my explanation is that the fire walking rules for thousands of years have been the fire walking rules. And in there is outside of the non-fire walking rules. So ancient Chinese medicine, whether you find some parts rational or not, if they were working, then you would use those. Now, if you see some parts which, for example, say, rhinoceros horn gives you an erection because a rhinoceros horn is solid, well, I don't find it at all acceptable to mistreat the rhinoceros, because that's clearly a description of sympathetic magic. That means you take a symbol similar to the thing you want, and you believe that you hold this symbol, and that gives you that result. And why not? I mean, if somebody prays that they get a result, and somebody else uses a symbol, and that's their idea of praying to get a result, why not? So why not use, say, a stick you find by the road instead of a rhinoceros horn for that same purpose? You can use the structure of these ancient systems without having to go to great expense or endangering wild animals. just to match their theory. Like, if that theory worked, the rhinoceros horn gave anyone an erection, well, maybe you go to the sex shop and buy a wooden penis, or whatever for you will be that sympathetic magic. But what it feels like when you breathe is the energy channels are woken up. But it does not actually feel like they're just inside the body, like the maps of Chinese medicine. That is not the only map. So then there are other maps like chakras, other maps like subtle bodies. So in fact, one doesn't have to get over technical, but simply leave, as one breathes, the idea that breathing is only in the body. The same as your food does, in fact, have smell. And smell is, in fact, an important part of you knowing what it tastes like. And that is an important part of how good you feel while you're eating, so why not also know that your subtle bodies are getting fed? Now, does it actually come from the food, the smell of the food, or does it come from how happy you are as you feel that you're participating in nature? To even think about that is getting too intellectual. What one does is lose the barriers that is only happening in your skin, because nothing is. And as you breathe, you can be breathing with the universe, or whatever size and stage you want, because the essential thing is you're getting back into rhythm, and anybody playing ugly emotional tricks on you is walking into a room with the whole body language will be matching the game they're playing, which will include dysfunctional breathing, which could trick you. So one way to protect yourself will be simply observe that breath. And for example, if they're taking a breath which would make you feel really bad, if you chose to breathe it through, accept it. Not in, breathe it through you. Like you're transparent to it, like the light shining through glass. Or you could decide that you take an out breath and you're spiraling a hurricane around you. So then their negative breath will simply speed up and leave, and they'll be a happy person, and nobody in the room will be negative. You know, there's so many ways you could respond to it. But the way most people respond to it is the whole room gets depressed. Ugh! Oh, I feel so bad when that person comes in. You know, people normally respond the same fixed way to the same animal negative body language. So there's so many different breaths you could use, which will protect yourself. And the only thing which will damage you is wishing you're protected. Like, put up a protective barrier. That means what this person did is real. So if you simply to breathe in as they breathe out with it consciously, then you won't breathe it in unconsciously. As long as you do the complete opposite to the normal conditioning of society, your breathing will protect you fine. Good. Another question? Or to turn the camera off?
Off.
The camera off. Good.